Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools, actionable insights to guide you along your healing journey. Together, we'll explore the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief and empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. Today, I have a guest with me that I'm very excited about because I had an awesome conversation with her last week. And so I'm really excited to introduce you guys to Natalie. Natalie is an ICU nurse and a holistic life coach for nurses and healthcare professionals around the hardships of their jobs and living in a life of alignment and balance. She helps people recover from burnout, create routines, and find joy in their life again. She's also created a new community on Facebook called Healing the Nurse Wound to focus on connecting with other nurses, healing them together, and holding a safe space for harder conversations. Natalie shared with me a lot in our pre-interview that nurses have a pretty wild job from my what I heard, and nurses go through an array of seeing lots of different situations, from the good things that we see to the also atrocities of life, and in that place of saving lives and watching people go through hard moments. So without further ado, I want to introduce Natalie. Natalie, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much. That introduction was so great. Wow. Um, I really, really appreciate what you're doing and sharing other people's stories of grief and their journeys. And it's just really exciting to be here.
Well, thank you. You shared an inspiring story with me last week, both from a nurse perspective, which is your occupation, but also you shared it from being a human, being another person that's going through trials just like a lot of us do. I know you shared your story about tragically losing your friend in a drunk driving accident and how that really impacted and shaped how you see grief and how you went through that healing journey. And I know you shared quite a bit. I don't want to spill all the beans on the table, but you shared how that one moment of life of losing your friend led you to so many new aspects and adventures of life and even rediscovering yourself in many ways. So I'd love to give you the floor to share that story because it's so beautiful and I can't wait for other people to hear it.
Yeah, I think it's hard because there's just so much to say around this topic. And like you said, as a nurse, especially ICU nurse, I worked during COVID. So that was a very difficult time, lots of grief that I was helping people through, and people losing loved ones that they weren't able to be with them at the bedside. And so being that person, the hand holder, talking through FaceTime and trying to help people not be scared was really hard. And it did get to the point where there were moments where, as a nurse, and I feel like other nurses might be able to relate to this, who were in the same situation or similar situations, where you just experience this like compassion fatigue in a way. And I don't mean this in, like, I don't know, nurses have feelings too, right? Like, it's really hard to watch all of this happen. And it did get to a point after so many months where I was like, you know, if someone had passed, would I feel anything at this point? Because it's just happening so frequently. Um, and I get like shaky even thinking about this because I had had a conversation with a coworker like the night before the accident and had said like that exact thing where I'm like, I just don't know. Like, I can't imagine like having emotions like these people are having because it's so like we're doing it all the time. Like I feel numb, right? And then that next day I get a call that someone in my life had passed and I was in complete shock um that had happened and I went through all the emotions. I think it definitely spun my nursing career for like a 360 just completely all the way around upside down flipping all over. I don't even know, but I think it gave me a completely different sense of compassion. And I had lost people in my life before, like grandparents and, aunts and uncles, but no one who you develop like such a really close bond with. I had mentioned I lost another friend when I was 14 to also a car accident. And, at 14, you're just not, you don't develop that like sense of adult, like individuality and connection with them. You're still young and you don't really understand fully the extent of everything. But during this one, it impacted me so differently because she was someone who, I lived with in college and we went and traveled the world together and like spent time running together and like I wouldn't be the person I am today without her. And so um it just was really hard to even imagine like a life where she wasn't here. And I thought it wasn't real because it just was so sudden and you know, the first thing you do is denial, right? You're just like,
Yeah, it's
this isn't real. The person who's telling me this is playing some kind of sick joke on me. Um, which it was like really hard, but I think something that came from that is when, and I actually have a really close friend who just recently expressed um, a similar feeling where when you're so close to someone, I feel like so young, and people start missing out on that like source of life that they brought to other people, you kind of feel like you need to fill that void that other people are feeling. And so you might be like, oh, I'm going to be the life of the party now, or I'm going to go do all these things they wanted to do. And I'm going to make sure that I can, especially as a caregiver, right? I always am like thinking about other people and, making sure they're not feeling hurt and not really fully addressing what it was meaning to me, or how it was even impacting me that I was stepping up to take like a position that was similar to what she was playing in our friendship like dynamics. Um, and it just felt like because we were so close, that was like my job in a way, which is a really weird thing to think about. But someone who was in the car accident with her actually said the same thing, that for like 3 years he's been doing the same thing, running himself ragged, like trying to be that life of a party, trying to be the connector that her and the other person who was in the accident who passed away was. They were like these sources of life that were just really, huge, and knew tons of people. And so um, kind of absorbing that like personality almost and trying to like live in what they were living in, if that makes sense. Um, and then you start realizing like for me, it was like, oh, do people actually want to be my friend, or are they just with my like being friends with me now because I'm reminding them of what they've lost? And so I had to go through this whole like, who am I now that this has happened? Um, and what does that mean in my life? And a lot has obviously changed. And you said like it's, I mean, grief is changes everyone, right? Um, and things, I mean, that threw me on my holistic journey. I definitely would not have gone down that route. I mean, I might have some point later in life. I've always been interested in it, but I wouldn't have found it so quickly. I wouldn't have met the people I did. And I feel like part of my healing journey was realizing like kind of that simple little phrase of what's meant to be will be. Um, and I remember one day being on a plane and someone saying, it was like I was sitting in the middle seat and there were these two people next to me and they were going through like almost exactly the same type of like life scenario that I was going through. And I was like, what are the odds that we're all sitting next to each other right now? And it was on the way to a coaching conference. And so I was like, that's insane, even more, right? And one of the girls, or there was a girl and a guy, and the girl was like, I just always believe in the, serendipity. And that became like my life word is serendipity. And like, I feel like once you start living in that, you start realizing how many things like happen. And if you just like take it for what it is, it's so much more, there's so much more behind it. And you're kind of walking this what I have called in the past like a yellow brick road that was like laid out for you. And yes, there are deviations that you can choose different paths and stuff, but the more that you pay attention and are present in your own life, the more you realize like this is the path you're supposed to be on, whether it's good or bad, and brings those like traumatic events. Um, at some point, you end up being where you're supposed to be. Um, and that's been really like, I just like am so thankful to have that mindset, I think, and have fallen into that. Um, because for so long, I mean, grief is just like a roller coaster, right? You're happy one day and then you're like depressed the next day. And then, I mean, it's
Yeah.
been, what did I say, like 3 years. Um, so it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, 3 years, I shouldn't feel this way anymore. And it's really hard too, because I think one thing you start to do, and we've talked about this, is compare other people's grief journeys. And so, although you sharing people's grief stories, something important is to know that no person's grief is the same as another. And even for the people they lose, like you might feel differently about your grief than I feel about mine. We might heal from it differently. Our path might look differently. Um, my boyfriend and I, we have completely different grief. We had known Alice, that was her name, for almost the same amount of time. I moved in with her freshman year in college, and we met, actually, her and I met Val together through friends of friends, and so they had known each other also the same amount. I mean, obviously, I think we were girls, and so we were best friends, and that whole thing. So it was a little bit different, but his way of grief is just like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to, it makes me sad. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it. It makes me angry. Like this guy shouldn't have been on the road. Whereas mine is like, I need to talk about it and I need to discuss, like, because she was such a huge part of my life. And it's hard to be like, oh, I'm not going to talk about, my friend. And that's something that I've experienced with other people in the friend group as well, is even if I'm not saying anything sad, which, there are moments where you break down and you're not expecting to break down. Like I'll go out with friends and all of a sudden I'm like, it's too much. Like I wish she was here, or, we used to do this or XYZ together. And um, you know, it, you go to like a friend's birthday party and I just was like, oh, like Alice would be so proud of you. Like, I know she wishes she was here. Like she's looking over you, blah, blah, blah. And that friend was like, you've got to stop talking about her. Like it's been 3 years. You need to move on. And that hit
Wow.
me really hard. Yeah. And so I also want to say for people who are listening is like, don't listen to that. I know it's hard. And like from that, I acknowledged it and I said, uh, okay, so this is someone I can't talk to about it, basically, right? But it shouldn't
Yeah.
stop me from talking about it, because that's how I share my love of her, and that's how you share memories. Um, but I do think when it's someone younger, it's not like I'm reminiscing a parent or a grandparent, and so it doesn't have the same, like, I don't know, there's just some kind of difference in conversation. Like if I were to say, "Oh, my grandparents, blah blah blah," or if I wish they were here for this, for my wedding or for graduation, no one's gonna say, "Oh, don't talk about that. That's sad." But I think because it's a young female who was in her 20s that passed away, it's like, "Oh, that's depressing. Like, don't talk about that." And there's like
Yeah.
this different weight around it, and it's so frustrating because I just want to carry out her like light, like her, I don't know, like vibrance in different
You
ways
want
and
to
bring it back. And
you
so it's
want to
really
carry her
interesting.
legacy forward. You want to
Yeah.
keep her legacy alive. And I love what you just said the last 10 minutes because you hit on so many big topics in grief. And I love that. And I hope everybody listening so far to this point under like here's everything that you just shared because you hit on major topics that come up in the grief process. And the one that you're talking about in particular that is really powerful is we do run into those people. And I like to call them not safe people to talk to, not safe people to be around when you're grieving. This doesn't mean they're bad people, by the way, and there's something wrong with them. It just means they're not safe for you as you're going through your healing journey. And I certainly dealt with that. When I lost my son, there were people, I lost an infant at 9 months, and I can tell you, I had less than 24 hours with that person. When my grandfather died, I had 33 years. I can tell you, I call it moving forward. I don't like that letting go, moving on thing. I just doesn't sit well with me, in the space I'm in. But I say there's moving forward. And if you have a person in your life that's been there 33 years, well, you got 33 years of things to look back on and memories you've had and experiences you've had. And when we have people that aren't with us that long, like Alice, for example, in your life, or even Caden, my son that passed, when you have that such short period of time and it's a young person, you oftentimes put yourself in that place of how do I grieve? How do I work through this process? And that was something I thought was really beautiful about the journey you shared with me when we first met is that, and I had to go on your Facebook page. I had to see the story. And I want to share with you guys, Natalie has a beautiful Facebook page. And what I want to share about that is that when Alice passed away, she shared with me that they had made this list of things they were going to do. Alice might have made this list of places to travel, marathons to do. And Natalie shared with me that part of her healing journey was going and doing those things after Alice passed. And it wasn't even a question about whether or not she was going to. She went and did them. And I thought that was such a beautiful celebration of her life. Could you share a little bit with the listeners today about that journey?
Yeah. Oh, I remember this. I just remember this conversation. So, because this does hit on a really good point of the healing journey as well. Um, is so the week before the accident, and I don't remember if I had shared this part actually, but um, I was living in North Carolina and Alice was in California, and we are big runners. So we had attempted a marathon together in Nashville, our first marathon. That was back in I think 2019, and then COVID happened, and we wanted to do a marathon together, but we ended up not. And she ended up running a marathon in California, and I ended up running a marathon in North Carolina within a week of each other. Like she ran like 1 week, and then I was the next Sunday. Um,
Nice.
and I still send the video that she sent me to people I know who run races because it was so impacting and it meant so much from her to, oh, I can't speak. It meant so much for her to send that to me, that video of like what the human body is capable of. And it was just like one of those like power up, like, videos, like you can do anything, like go out and run this race. And it just was so cool to have that experience across the country from each other. Because running marathons was something that I did not want to do at all. And Alice convinced, I was like, half marathon, sure, triathlon, great. A marathon, I never see myself doing that. And then Alice convinced me into it. And so yeah, so then after that first one, it was just so great. And then I was planning on seeing her for my birthday. So this was in November, the first week of November, and I was supposed to fly back out to California for my birthday, the end of November, beginning the first week of December. Um, and we were talking about all this stuff, like the things we were gonna do, because I think we had like a Mexico trip planned for my birthday, and like it was like a shared birthday with someone else. And I was like, I'm coming. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, oh, I'm coming from one place, and then I'm gonna have to have clothes for a different place. And she was like, oh, don't even worry about it. Like you can take, we'll pack my clothes for the Mexico trip. You just pack for like coming to visit me, and then we'll just share the same clothes for Mexico. And I was like, okay, great. And just the fact that she was so willing to like share with everyone, it wasn't just me, it was like just how she was like, oh, don't worry, like you don't have to think about this at all. Like we'll do this together. And as we were talking, um, obviously we go back and forth at the end of the year, and she had sent me this voice memo, which was so special because we had never really sent voice memos like in the past. I don't know if voice memos like just happened, or I don't know what, like why she sent a voice memo. Um, but she had sent like a couple voice memos like that week before the accident, and one of them was the list of things she wanted to do the following year. And, it was Stagecoach, Coachella, which are in the same month, and crazy to go back to back. Um, and then run the Berlin Marathon. And then there were a couple other things on the list, but those are like the big ones. And so the next year, I mean, I had planned, she was like, what are you going to do? And I had already planned on kind of like leaving my job and being like, okay, I'm going to go travel nurse. Like, we'll make it work. Like, I'll finally have the money to pay for all this stuff. So I had like bought tickets together with her and for Coachella and Stagecoach, and I was so excited. And then, I mean, the accident happened less than a week later. Um, and it was really hard because a lot of the people who were going to go to Coachella actually ended up bailing and not going. And it was me and one other person. And then I was able to convince another friend of mine. But yes, I went and completed all of the things on her list. I felt like it was kind of something that I had to do. Even the Berlin Marathon, we ended up doing that, which was absolutely amazing. Probably well, yeah, I would say my favorite marathon to date. I really like the Berlin Marathon. I've done four, and that was my favorite one so far. Um, but what I think was important about this to share is even though I went and did all those things, if I look back on that year and um, feel like I didn't truly experience it, which we had kind of touched on, because I was so caught up in trying to be this glue for everyone else that I wasn't experiencing those experiences. Like I wasn't fully there. And so, like, yes, I remember Coachella and I remember Stagecoach, and I just wish I had treasured it more, knowing that that was the last thing on her list. Was running running that marathon, traveling to Croatia that summer and doing a boating trip, and like all these things that were like very important to her to do that following year. And like that, just it's just so hard to look back and be like, that experience was not great for me. And I'm so grateful I did it, but it was so I guess the moral of the story is don't be hard on yourself. If you go and
Yeah.
do these things and then you feel guilty about it, or like you're not having the feelings you think you should feel, because you can't predict your feelings. And at that time it was so soon after. I wasn't really processing anything yet. I was being that the planner, the trip planner. I mean, I planned a trip for 20 people that year, that and took 20 people on a
Oh,
trip that she wanted to go on, that Croatia boat trip. I took 20 people
that's
on it. And
amazing.
so it's like and the Berlin Marathon, there were I think seven of us on that trip that we planned. And so there were a lot of things that happened. And it is, I mean, I'm not as upset about it now, but I remember the following year, I just was so mad at myself because I was like, I really wanted to do all of this for Alice. And I did, but I can't say that I truly enjoyed it. I can't say that I was like fully like grateful for every moment that I had. Um, I mean, there were little pieces here and there where I would do my own thing, but I think it was really hard being surrounded by so many people who were in this like weird grief area. Um, and and then there's people who weren't that close, that kind of like healed, quote unquote, from it a little bit sooner, or like had processed that level of grief, or their levels of grief. And then for me it felt like I was being left behind, and it was like, who are my people that will always relate to this? Because, when that first happens, you're kind of just like, oh, thank God I have someone, or like I have this community. And slowly that community starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller because people move on. And I do say that to say that because I believe in
Yeah.
um not moving on. I believe in figuring out how to like live with it. Um and I will never be moved on, right, from this. This isn't something that I'm just gonna like get over one day.
Yeah,
Um,
you shared something
so
really powerful about the grief experience with what you just shared, and I'm trying to keep pace because you bring up some really good topics that I love about
sorry.
this. No, it's all really good stuff that I know people listening to this podcast are going to really be able to relate to. And I think something you brought up is that array of emotions come up when we're processing grief. There's days that we feel okay, like the world's fine and like nothing ever happened. We feel days that grief feels like a freight train just smacking you right in the head and just really just beating you down. Grief feels that heavy at times. It really does. And you addressed it really well by saying that you were doing all these trips and all these experiences to celebrate her. And you feel like it's still, while doing that, you still weren't fully like appreciating her in the moment with it. And I think that's a real testament to what grief is really like. You have all these intentions, you take all these actions, you do all these certain things, and there still feels like there's something missing, there's something out. And that was such a powerful example you gave of working through grief and being present in your life. That is something that's a beautiful story that I think really represents what grief is like in a lot of ways. And the other thing you brought up too is that people are always on different wavelengths with grief. When I lost my grandparents, my mom and my grandma moved on the day after, like nothing ever happened. I was a wreck. I didn't eat for 3 days. I didn't sleep for a week, and I was a wreck for 6 months. Like I share that to say, just like you did, there were friends of yours that moved on fast, and then you said, just like I am, I can't just get over this. I can't just move on. It's not gonna happen. And so it's figuring out what that move forward looks like. And I share in my coaching practice with people that moving forward is a very personal journey. It's not something to be compared to. There's nothing to compare it to because your experience is very individual. And so I always say that your grief is oftentimes like a little kid, pulling your shirt at the store saying, "Look, look, look, I really want to see this." Your grief is always there like that. And so if you learn to pay attention to it and say, what are you trying to show me right now? What are you trying to communicate with me? What are you trying to tell me? Is there something I need to learn right now or something I need to hear? When you treat your grief in that aspect, you really can start finding the meaning of those things. And I think that's what's so inspiring about your story of this video you still have of Alice. And you call it a pump up thing. And I'm thinking of David Goggins in my head because you just reminded me of this. I need to see this video myself because I have a feeling it's on the similar wavelength of that. But just you say you have that video, you still have it, and it's that thing that drives and pushes you. And that's where Alice isn't just a person that was in your life and she's no longer here. Alice is still here in a different form. And I think that you have demonstrated today with telling your story that just because somebody isn't here physically doesn't mean they're gone. And it doesn't mean we get over it. But there's ways that we can celebrate this person and do things in our lives, activities and whatnot, to still celebrate these people and still have them with us, just in a different capacity.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to say off of that too. One was when you address the emotions, I remember something we also brought up in the other conversation we were having was I kind of had said it like imposter syndrome, where, you, which again, I'm not sure if this is the right terminology, but I would say that's how I felt like that I wasn't being who I was supposed to be. Um, I mean, I feel like that's something I've kind of dealt with a lot, just with emotions, actually. And so getting, my holistic journey and getting more in touch with those emotions and like listening. Um, but yeah, with grief and how you feel, like there are those days of how can I be so happy, and then like the next week I'm like incapacitated for not just the day but literally an entire week. I'm so depressed, I don't want to do anything, I want to sit on the couch. And you're just like, could it really be grief? Or and you sit there and you search like, is it my sleep? Am I not eating? Like, what am I doing wrong? And I like sit there and I overthink and I'm like, what was it? Like, what triggered this? And in those moments, just like learning to have like patience and grace with yourself, right? To be upset in those moments. And even if it was something else, even if it wasn't grief, just to share this, like give yourself that time. Like it is so rare, I feel like now that people actually let themselves feel these negative emotions. And it is such an important process of being a human. Like it's like processing all the things that happen to us. Um, day to day, we're overwhelmed and overstimulated with so much that, yeah, at some point you're gonna break down, right? And
Yeah.
it's like meant to happen at one point or another. And with grief, I just feel like that roller coaster was so much sharper. Um, and I had mentioned previously that, you know, becoming more aware of my emotions, like I'm a very like happy, like outgoing, and we talked about me being a Sagittarius. I'm like all over the place, um, very fiery, like just kind of, friends with everyone, very, very happy, and adventuring all over the place. And I had like not cried, we had talked about this for, I don't even remember the last time I had cried at the point when Alice had passed away. And then since then, I have been crying, I mean, at least once a month, maybe not once a month, but like way more frequently than I've ever cried in my entire life. Um, and it's just because I've been so much more in tune with that like fluctuation of emotions and just like letting those walls down and telling myself like it's okay to be sad sometimes, and like sometimes you need a day and sometimes it's a week. It's not
Yep.
always just a day. It's you sit there and you're like, all right, I'm gonna give myself an hour, and you're like, nope, that didn't work. and
Yeah.
then it's and then it's like 4 days later and you're like, am I depressed? Do I need to do something about this? And then the next day you're
That's
like out gardening or going for a run like me, and you're like, and that's where I just was feeling that misalignment of emotions, like how can I swing so like drastically in those moments, but that's just a part of being a human.
Yeah, that's I shared on a different podcast. I interviewed this guy in Florida and he like you didn't feel his emotions at all. He went through one of his friends died in a house fire, the other one got shot. He lost his uncle to a gunshot crime that happened, and he didn't cry at any of those events. And then it wasn't until years later, till he got married, that his wife said, "You don't feel emotions." And he said, "Yeah, that's interesting." And like you just said, he cried for 4 days straight just up from doing the dishes. He finally allowed himself to feel. And that's where, I share with people when you go through grief and you don't know how to feel emotion, it's a very interesting experience because what you're really doing is denying yourself the right to feel how you feel. And that's because, we're taught with so many different things, society, family, work, jobs, friends, how to think, feel, and believe. And so we sometimes follow those norms a lot. And I've always said in my life, and I get made fun of for this all the time, but conformity is the death of individuality. And I really believe that in this journey of life we're on, we all have different experiences and different journeys, and that should be celebrated, not taken away. And in the grief space, I've always told people when you don't feel your emotions, it's like a little, if you've ever watched Chinese ping pong before, really fascinating, by the way, but focus on the ping pong ball, right? Not the guys hitting the paddles, but focus on the ping pong ball. Notice how fast it goes back and forth across the table. It's going as fast as my fingers are right now. When you don't listen to your emotions, that's what's going on inside you. That emotion is going crazy inside you because it needs to get let out. And so, I've always shared with people that if you don't give yourself space to feel your emotions, you're really doing a disservice to yourself because you're not listening to you. And that's the big problem that goes on in grief is you're not listening to yourself. And it's okay to feel things. I talked to a grown man. I'll say that. I'm a grown man myself, 38. And we don't cry that often. Well, we don't cry because, like him, he got told big boys don't cry. Well, hate to tell you this, vulnerability is a strength, and big boys do cry because we have emotions. And so when we learn to feel those emotions and say, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling sad, I miss Alice, I miss Caden. When we allow ourselves to say that and we feel that buildup that comes here, that's letting it release. And that's giving us this place to be safe, feel seen and heard and understood, and allowing us to feel comfortable in our grief. And I think that grief gets this negative connotation with people for some reason, like don't talk about it or don't, hang on to it. But when we give ourselves that space, it's really powerful. I've learned that grief in particular is a gateway to personal transformation. It really is because
Mm.
we're shedding this old version of ourselves. Natalie that was with Alice doesn't exist much anymore. Natalie after Alice, she exists and she's a better person, by the way, better version of Natalie. I call it the 2.0 version of us, that went out there and did all those things we might not have done before had we not had that experience. But we also, by the way, with that 2.0 version, we're carrying that person we lost with us because that's the one that drives us and puts the fire behind us. And I think that it's a very beautiful thing that should be celebrated and talked about more. And that's where, I don't know, I'll let you elaborate on this, but people say to me, how can you feel the way you do about losing your son? I said, all those negative things are there, depression and anger and frustration, they're all there. They're always there. But if I choose to celebrate this person's life and what they gave me, and I honor them by creating a legacy, now I've now taken that thing and created purpose and meaning in my life. And that's what really attracted me to your story about Alice, when we first met, was I saw somebody that lost a very close friend, and it was a pivot point in your life. And then you went and did marathons, you went and traveled, you went and did all these things that you and Alice had planned. And I thought that was such a beautiful celebration of life.
Thank you. Gosh, I feel like I should be writing things down right now because there's so many things that I want to say based on what you say. One, I want to say that vulnerability builds connections and deepens connections as well. You were talking about how, there's a lot of societal norms, like it's not okay to let those walls down. Big boys don't cry, that kind of stuff. But um, I mean, I don't want to say this for everyone because I know it's not the case because grief does impact marriages quite a bit, especially over the loss of a child. And um, but it deepens connections with people as well. When you're able to let those walls down, you're able to connect so much more authentically, like you said, with others. And you wouldn't experience that if you didn't let those walls down, right? Like you wouldn't be able to connect on such a raw level without that vulnerability. And connection is something we crave as humans. I mean, people might not know it, but even if you are an introvert, I feel like at some level you do want someone to connect with, right? You don't want to be alone. Um, you just want someone who understands. And when you are able to be vulnerable with that and let go of those like norms that we're told, right? Then it allows for that to happen. Um, oh gosh, there's something else that I was going to say based on what um something you said, but I can't remember it, which is why I was thinking I need to write these things down. But another one was back to the norms as well. I wanted to address as someone who is, an oldest child, is, someone who's been put in a lot of responsibility and as a caretaker in my career and kind of assumes the caretaker role like a lot of nurses do. And this is kind of what I also help coach nurses around is putting more on yourself because of the role that we have in our careers. So I do want to address like for those people who feel like they might not be able to share their emotions or have their emotions because they're in this role of being the brick for someone else, right? The like thing that's holding someone else together, or the glue, or even multiple people, like the family. It is so important, even if you are that person, to find some way or some outlet. It doesn't have to be a therapist, it can be a friend, it can be a significant other, um, but someone who is safe to like let those emotions go with, even if it's just with yourself and like experimenting, right? Like having that alone time to just be like, okay, I have to be, you know, the big person and the glue for everyone 90% of the time. But when I go for my runs, that's my 10%, and I'm gonna just cry on my runs.
Exactly.
And I'm gonna have that release, or it's just so important for like your mental health to have that, like it's okay to not be okay sometimes, even if you are that like foundation for someone else or for a family. And so I wanted to hit on that as well. Um, and then another thing I wanted to bring up a while ago was dreams, because I remember me and a couple other close friends, like one of the things we were like, when's Alice gonna come visit us in our dreams? Like when, when are we gonna have a dream about her? When are we gonna do this? And the craziest thing was the first dream I had of her. I always wished she would show up in my dreams. I've only had a couple um with her, but the first dream I actually had is was the reason that I kind of decided to experiment with coaching, like kind of be like, what is this world? Um, because her and I had talked about how much I really liked health and wellness and like all these things, being a runner and being interested in the medical field. And I just love helping people feel better, whether it's, you know, food and nutrition and diet and working out, or if it's emotionally or through work and socially, I feel like is a huge thing I talk about with a lot of people as well, mentioning those connections previously. Um, but in my dream, in we were in Spain. We had gone on a trip together. It was a hotel that we'd been in Barcelona on this little balcony that we had. We actually, it was right before we left. This really happened. Right before we left that hotel on La Rambla. I don't know if you've ever been to Barcelona, but
I
it's like the main street.
haven't.
There was this cute little hotel with balconies that looked out on La Rambla, and we had eaten breakfast out there, and we're just looking down on people and like talking about, I don't know, where we were going next, right? And then we rushed out and moved on to the next place, which I think was like Nice or something. But um, we in my dream, we're in that hotel again, and we were sitting having coffee on that balcony. And she was talking, I'm getting chills just talking about this because it's been so long since I've shared this dream. Um, uh, and she was like, I think you should coach people, like maybe running. Like maybe do you want to do like run coaching, and that way you can do like the diet and exercise, and like you're always so interested in all these things. And she was like, I think you could do it. Like if you like you can do that with nursing. It's not, anything like like it's not going to overload you. Like it's something you enjoy. Um, and I remember after that dream talking to one of her other like the three of us were really close friends and runners, and saying like, isn't that crazy? Like, why would she tell me to be a run coach? Like that's so random. And I'm not a run coach yet. I do want to be a run coach eventually, but I have so much more to learn with running, I feel like, which you could say with everything, right? But um that was one dream, and then, I felt so upset that she like never came back in my dreams. And then in November, which is the anniversary month, um, November of just this last year, I had another dream of her. And I just, last bit that I want to share, because I know we're coming close on time, but she, it was actually a nightmare. Like I have really scary dreams, like very frequently, just that's normal for me. But in the midst of all the chaos that was going on in my dream, she walked into this house in this like white outfit, like all white, like businesswoman, like powerhouse kind of outfit, like just stunning. Like, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, I'm like, Alice, what are you doing here? And she's like, I just thought I'd drop by and say hello. And I was like, but you can't be here. And she was like, I don't know. I just was thinking I'd hang around for a little bit. And I was like, what do you mean hang around? And she was like, I'm just gonna be here until like, I don't know, maybe March. And I was like, what? And so what's really interesting about this is this dream happened. So I had also run the New York Marathon because that was one of the marathons Alice wanted to run. So I ran the New York Marathon in 2023. And then this third girl that I was talking about, her name's Lauren, she ran the New York Marathon in 2024, this last year. And she had said, I felt like Alice was there, like, there was a lot going on. And in my dream, she had said, like, oh, I just got back from like New York. I'm coming to like look over you. I'll probably be here till March. And or not, I'm coming to look over you, but she's like, I'm just gonna visit till like March, then I'll go somewhere else. And I'm getting chills again. But what's so crazy is like what has happened between November and now. I mean, it's not March yet, has been like, I just feel like my life is just like accelerated. Like there's things that have happened that I'm just so thankful for the opportunity. I'm like meeting new people, I'm making new connections. I've started, supporting so many more nurses. And it's just like having, I don't know if subconsciously it's because she said she was looking over me, or maybe she actually is, and she's, helping all this kind of come to fruition. And um, it's just one of those crazy things where it was so specific, right? Where I'm like, what,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? Um, and I know, a lot of adults I don't feel like have dreams as much anymore. I unfortunately have a lot, just probably my overactive brain. But that was one where every time I have a dream or get just that feeling, there's that feeling inside you that just connects you. Um, whether, you're running and you hit like a good stride, or you're out at, on a hike and there's a breeze that comes by, or a bird that comes up and sits right where, you know, you didn't know it was coming, but it just lands right in front of you. And it's like, what the heck? Um, so again, with just being open, right, to anything and everything, like the signs, and looking for those connections, because um yeah, their physical being might not be here, but who's to know, or who's to say that the spiritual being is not? Um, and life is energy, right? We're all made up of energy, and energy never goes away. It just takes different form, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
that's
it's something very interesting that I also wanted to share.
that's really beautiful, and I'm actually really happy you shared that because I too had a weird dream like that when I lost my grandfather. It was about 30 days after he died, and I appreciate you sharing that because I don't meet many people that have dreams like that. And I would encourage people, by the way, I'm not saying I'm yay for this kind of thing, but just be mindful and aware that it could happen. What Natalie just talked about is something I've experienced in my own life. And when I lost my grandfather, about 30 days after that, I had a wild dream one night that felt like he was like legitimately right next to my bed in full figured form. And I could smell, I could hear, all the senses were lit. And I felt like I had this long conversation, just like how you said Alice showed up and was like, I'm just gonna hang out here for a minute. I'm gonna be here. And I remember being like, what the hell? What are you doing? Like, what? How are you here? Like you just have this really like inert reaction in yourself of like, is this real? Is this happening? Like what's going on right now? And my grandfather had a whole talk with me. I swear it felt like an hour with him. And then all of a sudden he just said, I have to go. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, where are you going? Like, what are you doing? Like, and then he just left. He literally just walked off. And I remember I woke up at 4 in the morning crying my eyes out and I couldn't explain it. Like it just, so I'm really appreciative that you shared that part of your story about Alice because that is something I had a similar thing that happened when Caden passed, and I just can't talk about it because I'm gonna cry. But I want to say your story about Alice is something very real because when we do lose somebody that we have a very close emotional connection with, somebody that's been a deep friend to us and has really impacted our life significantly, if you do lose somebody in that capacity, just be open and aware to that. Like Natalie said, this is really up for belief, by the way, so whatever you believe, but I'll say that I share Natalie's belief in the sense that energy doesn't die, it transforms and it goes in different areas. And I have had unexplained circumstances like the dream you had happen, and I can't explain it, but it happened. And so, leaving yourself open to those experiences in your life, I think, is a very big thing. Another thing you brought up that is really powerful is looking for signs. I can't describe how many times after I lost my son and my grandfather, I'd find random dimes and pennies and all sorts of stuff all over the ground. Or I would have, back home in New Hampshire, I'd always have cardinals come by, but they would never come by all the time like my neighbor would. It was very sporadic, and it would usually be when I was having a really hard day in my grief, about those two, that these cardinals would show up in my yard. And there's just all these signs and synchronicities that happen in our life. And I was kind of laughing that you touched on that you've had all these opportunities lately, making new connections, meeting new people. Like you said, having a great stride on a run. I know I have a friend that's a runner, and he talks about that all the time. Some days he tells me my run is terrible. I hated it today. The
Yeah.
next day he's like, I hit my run. It was all good. It was better than I thought. I don't understand because I'm not a runner, but I picked up on his energy levels with that. Um, but yeah, when you open yourself up to those signs in the universe, I really do think that there's something bigger than ourselves that goes on. And coming back to what you said about meeting new people, I've met so many people in the grief space lately, beautiful people like you that have an incredible story, that just carries so much weight. And I can't help but think, because it happened with my son and my grandfather, I can't help but think that same thing happened with Alice for you, that was really, she's not here physically, but she's still there spiritually for you. And all those gifts that you're getting, she's in the background, literally pushing the stuff towards you and still
Mhm.
saying, I'm here for you. I'm still here. I never left. Um,
Yeah.
I just think that was really powerful for you to share. I appreciate you saying that today.
Yeah, of course. Just adding on to that, even if you don't, believe in all, I mean, not that you have to believe in it really for it to happen. It just happens, which is my point, is allow yourself to find comfort in those things, right? Like don't second guess it. Just if it's a thought that crosses your mind, just acknowledge it, right? Like don't double think like, oh, like that couldn't really be this, or just allow your mind to find comfort in the thought that they're there, right? And that's, I think, also important, is to not be overthinking and trying to convince yourself out of the initial feelings that your brain wants to have, right? Um, so yeah, finding comfort and just like letting it happen, and don't think too much about it.
I think
Just let it be.
I think that's excellent advice because that's, to bring this full circle, what Natalie just said about don't second guess this, just allow yourself space to feel this. I think that is the most transformational advice that you can give somebody that's going through grief, because that's the reason I did this podcast in the first place, is that all of our grief journeys are very individual, very different. As you guys have witnessed today on this podcast episode in particular, and it's why I'm really excited and happy to have Natalie here today, is that you guys saw that we did share some similar experiences on our grief journey. We shared similar ones, but our journeys were very different and very independent. And so I want to make sure listeners today, pick up on that your journey doesn't have to be Natalie's. It doesn't have to be Chris's. It doesn't have to be this other person's journey. This grief journey really is your own. And it's something that you should embrace fully. It's something that you should, keep an open mind to. Just like Natalie said, be open. Just allow these things to happen. And when you do experience an emotion or a feeling, or on the spiritual side of things, when your person that passed comes and knocks on your door and says, I'm going to hang out here, be open to that. Give yourself that opportunity to feel it, because you never really know what's going to happen. You never really know where that's going to go. And it may be the thing that leads you to that place of healing and may give you some solidarity in your grief journey.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. I
so
feel like there's so
Natalie,
much more we could talk about.
I may have to bring you back for a second episode. I feel like we'd had
Please.
things we didn't quite get on today, but
I know.
we'll do episode 2 with it. That'll be fun. So
Yeah, I would love that.
So, Natalie, I have a couple questions I want to ask you before we wrap up. The first question, if somebody is going through grief right now and just recently lost someone, or is going through grief or trauma in whatever way, what is one or two things you could share with them as they start their grief journey that would help them go forward in move forward capacity?
I think we kind of hit on a couple here today. One, have time by yourself. I think that would be my first recommendation because um, I mean, it really depends on the person, right? I could go so many ways with this, but um, obviously you don't want to isolate, but for me, I threw myself into people. That's just who I am. I'm a people person. I'm outgoing. I'm an extrovert. I get my energy from people, and I got lost in it, like we had talked about. So I think setting that time aside for me to have that quiet and like sit with my feelings and really sit with them, um, that's when I was kind of like, okay, I can start processing. And also another thing, this is kind of a little not, I don't want to say embarrassing, but because I am past that now. Allow yourself to go out and cry in public because it hits you at any point in time. The week after the accident, obviously the accident wasn't planned, but my sister and I had a planned Disney World trip and we still went on it, even though I was like, I do not want to go on this. And I will say, like, sometimes it's okay to go out and like not be okay and just like, you know, obviously, well, not obviously, there's a great thing right now, if you haven't heard about it, the Mel Robbins thing, the let them theory, right?
Yep.
Um, let people judge you. No one knows your story. No one knows what's happened. No one knows how you process emotions. No one knows anything about you like you know about you, right? And so going out, I mean, there were times where I went to the grocery store and someone would be like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I'd be like, "Actually, I'm terrible," and just like allow yourself to say that because it's okay. Like, let them be uncomfortable, but at least you're voicing your emotions. Like, maybe you don't want to talk, and it's okay to say, like, just don't worry about what other people are thinking. Have your emotions. Um, just let them as in your emotions come, and let them as in other people. Just let them be. Let them think what they want to think, but stay on your own journey, your own path. Don't change your emotions for someone else's
That
idea of
is
what it should be.
that is beautiful advice. I appreciate you saying what you just did because that's going to make a world of difference for somebody that's just now getting started in their grief journey. That's powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. My second question I have for you, where can people find you and get connected with you?
Yes, I am on Instagram at Natalie Rose Coaching. I think it's at Natalie underscore Rose underscore coaching. Um, Post a lot of like emotional resiliency stuff, values, also nursing things if you're a nurse and struggling with life as a nurse in general, especially ICU nurses, I can relate to losing patients. I have coded patients on the floor, so I can relate to that as well. The floor is in not in the ICU, sorry, not the literal floor. Um, and I am on Facebook. You can find me at just Natalie Miller Binkley. Add me. I love making new friends, new connections. I love sharing stories, learning new things. And also, if you're a nurse, join my Facebook group, Healing the Nurse Wound. Host monthly group chats on Zoom just to get to vent and connect with other nurses and support each other, and really heal that journey as a nurse that can be really difficult.
That's beautiful. Well, I really want to say, Natalie, thank you so much for being a guest today. This has been an awesome podcast episode, and I really love. I want to give a shout out, by the way. I want to give a shout out to Alice for everything that she gave you, because I really say that she gave you probably the biggest gift and is still giving you gifts today. So I really just want to give a shout out to Alice today on this episode. And I want to say thank you for being vulnerable and open enough to share your story of going through grief and loss with losing Alice and just your journey and your experiences of life and how you've navigated that path. I really feel like you gave a lot of sound advice today, a lot of big things that society kind of pushes us away from that we need to go back to. And I think there's people that will listen to this podcast and take away a lot of good lessons that will let them step into their own personal power on their grief journey and learn how to process and feel their emotions. I just want to say a big thank you today for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I like to say Alice gave me my voice finally. So it's been really great.
I love
But
that.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been, again, wonderful.
Well, we'll definitely have to reconnect for another episode so we can dive a little deeper on certain topics because you have a wealth of information on this area of life. For everybody that's listening today, thank you for joining the Empower Grief Journey podcast. It is a pleasure to have your support and listenership as we go along and continue to create more episodes of stories just like Natalie's that can help inspire and change the lives of people who are navigating their grief journey. I'll be back next week with another episode with a different guest on the show. And other than that, I just want to say thank you for everyone's support, and I wish you guys the best on your grief journey.